Welcome back. Off the Record starts right now. On the OTR panel this week, we have Paul Egan and Chuck Stokes, along with Kyle Malin. Now here's the rundown. One major story in town, the Detroit financial crisis heats up. Later on, we'll be joined by Representative Harvey Santana on the governor's efforts to help solve the Detroit financial mess. All this and more coming up right now, Off the Record.
Getting the inside out. It's Off the Record with senior Capitol correspondent Tim Skubic and his Capitol Press Corps colleagues.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by a grant from Truscott-Rossman, Michigan's only bipartisan strategic communications firm, serving statewide, national, and international clients from their offices in Lansing, Detroit, and Grand Rapids. TruscottRossman.com. By the Michigan Food and Beverage Association, in conjunction with the Michigan Business and Professional Association, working together for its members. Membership information on the web at mishbusiness.org. And by Hager Fox Heating and Air Conditioning Company, providing comfort to mid-Michigan homes and businesses since 1941. Hager Fox and Bryant, for whatever it takes. On the web at hagerfox.com.
And now this edition of Off the Record with Tim Skubic.
Thank you, Joe Donovan, and welcome to this week's edition of Off the Record. Well, clearly the story is Detroit versus the state or vice versa. And Paul, why is everybody or most folks in Detroit upset with the governor?
Well,
where to start, right?
Right, where to start. You know, obviously anything that's taking away power from elected officials is always going to be controversial, and particularly so in a majority African-American community for a lot of historical reasons. What's interesting is this problem has seemed so intractable for so many years, but look at how the conversation has progressed. Not that long ago, Councilman Gary Brown was the only one that publicly favored a consent agreement. Today we're talking about what form a consent agreement should take. You know, I think there's still so many hurdles. Who knows if this will get done, but it's Snyder has moved this issue, which had to be addressed, has moved it to a point, you know, that's closer to some kind of permanent resolution than it's ever been.
Chuck.
I think you've hit the nail on the head for all the cultural and historical reasons. That's why it's raised such an uproar in the city of Detroit. But with elected officials, to a great extent, because they see their power being just pushed aside and being put in a position where they may look like puppets. But if you talk to a lot of the grassroots people, they're ready for something to happen. And they're as upset maybe with the governor as they are their own Detroit elected officials. And I've heard several of them say, you know what, if this is going to fix the problem, then bring it on.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of politicking going on here too, because this is the first time we've gotten something put on the table, and I think the immediate reaction is, oh my God. You know, this is fine. This could really happen. I mean, this is what we're really talking about here. We're talking about the mayor being overseen basically by an advisory committee of you know, who are these 9 folks going to be? It was kind of a shock. I think your initial reaction, you know, in the city of Detroit, especially if you're an elected official, is shock. Like, this is really going to change things. We're not just talking about trying to milk some concessions out of a bunch of labor unions now. Now we're actually talking about our heads on a platter now. Now we're actually talking about, you know, losing some power and losing some control. And, you know, him going to Europe this week, maybe the cooling off period is really what needs to happen, so folks can really realize that, hey, if this doesn't happen, we might not even have, we may have an emergency manager, and this is what an emergency manager means.
Well, the crux of his proposal, the heartbeat of the proposal, is this this financial advisory committee. It's not an advisory committee. To me, says we give you some suggestions and do what you want. This advisory committee has veto power. Here's the stuff they can veto: the budget, amendments to the budget, the sale of city assets, contracts, the mayor's appointments, and the organizational structure of government. That's not just an advisory group, boys and girls. That is basically a group that may be running city government. Is that a fair conclusion or not?
Well, yeah, and that's what has a lot of people upset, is they feel that while you have this committee that's supposed to look like it's so kind of democratic, that essentially it's the emergency financial manager as a multiple
Times
group
9
of people. That's right, and that the mayor's not having any power in this, and the elected officials aren't having any power in this. The governor, when you hear him talk, he compares this board to New York a lot, and the solution that they had up in New York, and he feels as though it worked well there and that it can work well in Detroit.
Now, in the governor's defense, he said the city council still continues to exist. They can still make decisions. The mayor still exists. He can deal with strategy and stuff like that. But isn't the heart of running government deciding who spends the money and how it goes? The governor doesn't agree with that, by the way, but I don't know. Help me out there.
I think for the legislative branch, particularly, control of the purse strings is critical. But, you know, I was impressed when I went back and looked at the New York situation, because the governor's right when he said there didn't appear to be this type of debate around that rescue plan, if you can call it that, and that board, which was largely appointed by the state, had the power not only they had to approve all financial matters, but certain contracts, any kind of revenue matters, and you know, Mayor Koch, who was mayor of New York at the time, has said that it worked well. He felt he was working with the board, you know. So I'm not arguing the governor's case, but it is true that that you had a similar board with very similar powers over New York City. The big difference is New York got a huge federal bailout, also some state money. We're not seeing, you know, we are seeing a lot of stick and not much carrot here.
In fact, he said yesterday, don't expect any money.
And you know what, though, Timmy? I mean, if you look, though, and also to the governor's point a bit, I mean, look at how many contortions he's doing to try and appease the city of Detroit, as opposed to other cities that are in financial problems. I mean, you didn't see this kind of rancor and excitement in the city of Benton Harbor, where the administration was trying to bend over backwards to try and make sure everybody was okay over there.
Well, that was Governor Granholm.
Well, I understand, but you see that. How about Flint?
Yeah.
I mean, the same thing. Yeah, we're just going to
Flint
go
went swimmingly.
I mean, they went right into an emergency manager, and then we've got the other financial difficulties in the various school districts. And I know Detroit is a bigger case, and this is the biggest city in the state, and so on. But you're seeing an administration, I think, is really in Governor Snyder, that's really trying to keep this from being explosive. I think that he's really trying to form from some common ground here. And you know, if you set the bar over here, maybe we can meet in the middle.
He
right
has
here.
said he's willing to talk.
Yeah, and I think he is. He's pushing this. In his view, Detroit was moving too slow.
He said, I wasn't seeing much
and he's
getting
not saying
done,
this
he
has
said.
to be the end-all solution, but it gets the conversation going. And indeed, it has got the conversation going. Now, where it winds up is anyone's guess.
Well, the interesting thing here, he keeps talking about the March 26th deadline for the review team to make a recommendation. Then he has 10 days to act. I asked him in the news conference yesterday, well, what happens after those 10 days? And what did he say, Paulie?
He said that's a legal question, and you were very persistent, and you pointed out the fact that he is a lawyer, and he said
I'm more of a CPA. When it's convenient, he's a CPA. Well, I did some digging on the thing, and it turns out there is no hard and fast deadline after the 10 days. And the reason he doesn't want to admit that is it takes all the pressure that is building now to find an agreement. This is one smart guy. He gets it. If you say, you know what, we got until May 1st. Let's everybody go to the beach. We'll go up to the island.
But just think of the leverage and the power that gives him, though, too.
Absolutely,
I mean,
it's a hammer.
I mean, the day after they come back with that recommendation, he can say, well, okay, well, I'll go ahead and I'll put an EM in place. Or if he sees progress going on, he can extend those days out into the future. So it is a very convenient power for him to have.
But it's a smart move on his part.
And Detroit has some leverage too. It's not a positive type of leverage, but you know, there's really two pieces to it. One, they know Snyder doesn't want to appoint an emergency manager. And two, that if there's a default on bonds or any kind of bankruptcy, that's bad for the whole state of Michigan. So, you know, it isn't a case where certainly things are stacked in the state's favor on this right now, but it's not a case where Detroit is in a position where they feel they just have to capitulate.
Yeah, and the question mark out there is all these petitions that have been signed and whether or not there's going to be a legal rock thrown into this whole thing, and all of a sudden you have Public Act for, a stay in there. And then what happens then?
Well, the language in the consent agreement, as the governor proposed, says, regardless of what the courts say, if we all sign this agreement to do this stuff, it doesn't matter what the courts say on Act 4, and that could be problematic as well. But look, I take him at his word. I think he is willing to sit down and talk to these folks and see if they can find a middle ground, and he has gotten the conversation going. We've moved from the governor is disingenuous, okay, and it isn't. When you watch him, you can't ruffle this guy. He's just.
Yeah.
I walked out to the car with him. I said, you took a couple hits yesterday, and he kind of smiled. He says, just doing my job, just doing my job.
And that's why, if it seems like if any governor can get this done, maybe it's him, because I think. Even you saw the rhetoric toned down yesterday from Mayor Bing and everyone else, and it does seem even as harsh as critics really don't believe that he has some other agenda. They really, I think it's.
He's not worried about re-election.
Yeah, and I think people, don't see it as some kind of power grab. That
some do. I've got guys in the Detroit delegation that believe that's exactly what's going on here.
There are a lot of Detroiters who believe that this is the state coming in and they're taking over, and they really don't want to talk, that this is the design, this is the plan, and the attitude is, you know what, we may have left the city years ago, but we're coming back and we're going to take it over and we're going to do it our way and in our style.
And I think that's why the governor is actually planning some town halls in Detroit in a couple weeks.
Which is a gutsy move.
That is very gutsy, but taking it to the people and showing them the books and saying, hey, listen, this is what kind of legacy costs you all are facing. $10,000 per person in the city of Detroit. Is that really kind of the city that you want? You guys are going to run out of cash in April, May. Let me just show you what that means. It is gutsy to go in there, but on the other hand, too, he's got to calm the fears that this isn't exactly what Chuck said, and that the state wants to come over and run the city for them.
All right, let's assume that the city and the mayor come back to the governor and say, this advisory panel, let's make them an advisory panel and give us the veto power. What does Governor Snyder do?
Well, I don't think he's going to. I don't think he's going to agree to that. But you can see the possibility of something evolving that gives, that gives a little more to the elected officials. I mean, who knows how this is going to play out? But there's certainly, as Chuck said, this was. He wasn't expecting this to be accepted carte blanche, and there's going to be some give and take, and if they are able to reach an agreement, it's going to represent something that's probably a little bit more palatable to the elected officials.
Is there a middle ground?
I think there's probably some middle ground. Exactly where it's going to settle in, I don't know, but I think this was clearly his way to force the conversation, do it and do it fast. I just felt like this is not moving fast enough. And I think from his vantage point, they aren't serious enough. This is putting pressure on the unions. This is putting pressure on city council. It's putting pressure on the mayor. And there has to be some kind of middle ground. Now, how far he'll bend, I don't know. We'll have to see.
He's somewhere with the advisory board. I think that's a model that he'd really like to see. I think the thing that we need to watch is the appointment process of those 9 people on the board and who gets the appointment of those 9 people. I think that may be where our middle ground could be reached.
He was telling us yesterday that this is not evenly divided. My count was it was six for the state and 3 for the city.
Right.
Did I add that up correctly?
I think so.
Yeah.
Well, when you consider that the governor will put names on the table that mayor and city council get to choose from.
I don't have authority to appoint if I'm told pick from these 6, which are given to me by the governor. That's a nice try.
Exactly,
okay, but
that's what I'm saying. That's where I think the middle ground has got to be, because who are these people going to be, and do the city council and the mayor really feel like they can work with these folks? If he gives them the names of 3 Republicans, for example. Well, they could say, well, we really can't work with any of these people, so this isn't a choice at all.
And then it's going to be interesting, too. There's a lot of rumors floating around Detroit. Mike Duggan recently bought a house in the city of Detroit.
You're going to get in trouble, Chuck. You're going to get a phone call.
I'm making a phone call.
Mike will be on the horn.
I'm just saying what the rumors are.
I got it.
Mike may have no interest whatsoever in it.
Well, I heard Tony Williams, the former mayor of D.C., who has been part of the talks here. He apparently has been brought in advising Hanad, because he turned that city around with a huge deficit. I've heard his name, but I don't think he's on the list. But look at The discussion has begun, and that's the important thing. Where it ends up as we sit here this morning, we have no idea. We can be optimistic and say they'll find that middle ground. Yeah. Do you think they can?
I think it's possible. I mean, much more so than I would have said 2 months ago. But I think there's a long way to go.
What about him getting on the plane and going to Germany and Italy? Perception and reality, is everything in politics good move, bad move?
I don't think it's necessarily a bad move. I mean, he's still in charge of this entire state. Granted, Detroit is the big kahuna, but he's got a lot of constituents out there, and he can say, "Look, I've got my people worrying."
He's got
dealing
Skype,
with
and he's got a
Detroit,
cell
but I'm
phone.
also looking at what's best for this entire state.
Yeah. I think his idea of a cooling off period is probably decent. I think if there's any criticism, I think it's probably maybe overblown. He'll be in contact. Okay, he'll still be in touch.
I think we're still going to see an emergency manager in Detroit.
Do you really?
Okay. I really do.
All right, let's see what happens. Let's call in Representative Santana. Representative, thanks. Detroit Representative Harvey Santana is in his first term in the Michigan House. Prior to that, he was a legislative assistant to a Detroit City Council member and a community organizer before that. He served in the Navy in Desert Storm and holds the BA and MS degrees from Eastern Michigan. He serves on the Energy Committee in the House. Representative, welcome to the program. Mr. Stokes with the first question.
Representative, you represent a section of the city of Detroit. You've been watching all of the back and forthness and this tug of war. Who's right and who's wrong in this situation? Is the governor more right or the mayor?
I don't know if anybody's right and wrong. I think what we have to do is figure out what to do. I mean, that's where the right and the wrong is. Let me say this, you know, when the governor put out his proposal, we all reacted, and we all reacted justifiably so because...
Did you overreact?
No.
You called him Saddam Hussein.
Look, and
Representative, you called him Saddam Hussein.
Here's the deal.
Senator, did you call him Saddam Hussein?
I didn't call him Saddam Hussein. Look, here's the deal.
What did you say?
Tim, here's the deal. Look, when you put forth a consent agreement that is as egregious as that one was, when it takes away the people's rights, when it takes away everything that Dr. Martin Luther King, who walked in the streets of Detroit, led a march down Woodward, Rosa Parks, who lived in our city, and when you look at the fact that Malcolm X was created in that city, you cannot, Tim, put out a consent agreement that takes away the people's right to vote and that takes away the people's authority from the city of Detroit and how our affairs are managed. And if the governor was offended with those comments, then I was offended by the consent agreement, as were the people of Detroit, the people that we all represent. And we made our voices clear on that because that's our job.
Now, did you tell him that as well when you met with him yesterday with the rest of the Detroit caucus?
I wrote out an apology in a Harvey Santana kind of way, and I made sure that he understood where I was coming from with it.
What did you apologize for?
I apologize, you know, if he took the comments out of context.
What did you say?
I don't remember. You're gonna. I'll tell you what. I'll give you the letter. You can read it for yourself.
What do you see as the solution? What's the middle ground?
Well, I think there is a lot of middle ground. I think what we have is, you know, two entities that are so far apart that they can't see the horizons. I think what we're going to have to do is get the mayor and the governor in a room, order a pizza, lock the door, and get these guys to hash it all out. Being over here and being over there, now the governor's off in Europe on a trade mission. I don't think that's going to work. These two entities.
You don't think he should have gone?
Well, I don't think it's going to work. I mean, I think that if this issue is as important as we're making it out to be, which it truly is, then we need to bring people to the table to sit down and talk this thing out. I mean, how long are you going to drag this thing out? Look, you know what concerns me about this whole deal? Here we are talking about an emergency manager, a financial review team. You know what's happening right now? People's homes are being foreclosed on. There's a lot of blight. How many murders, how many shootings have we had in the last 2 weeks? With the amount of DTE and DWSD water shutoffs that are going on, with the amount of unemployment, and with the amount of stuff that's taking place, this is a powder keg, Tim. This is a powder keg ready to explode. And when something happens, all it's going to take is a little bit of civil unrest with people as frustrated as they are. And then what? Who's going to be the face of that? Is it going to be an emergency manager? Is it going to be a financial review team? Where's going to be the leadership who understands the social and cultural dynamics of the city that we represent? That's a problem. We're not talking about that. What we're doing is we're pretending that the people don't exist. We're going to create this bureaucratic model that somehow is going to solve all of these problems, but we're forgetting about all the other things that are taking place in the city right now, which by and large are the issues that I get called upon.
Well, what responsibilities should the city's recent elected leaders bear for that? I mean, take Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick, and he's obviously innocent until proven guilty, but if he stole and extorted and gave to his friends even a percentage of the money he's accused of, you know, how could that money be used to help Detroiters right now? And I mean, aren't Detroit elected officials responsible for some of the mess the city's in?
Well, Paul, I think you can put a lot of faces, a lot of names, a lot of different policy changes, and blame them all for it. The question is, that's already happened. What do we do right here, right now? And I agree with the governor. I agree with the governor that, look, the fact of the matter is, how do we solve this problem? Because it's not going to go away. How do we deal with it right now? Going back and looking at what different people have said and what has happened, who took what, and who's on first and who's on third, who's running a second, that's all done. We got to deal with the problem now.
Representative, shouldn't Detroiters have gotten up in arms a long time ago about the condition of the city, about city services, about solving the financial issues to the point
that's the new version of it.
Their elected representatives responsible, and therefore they would not necessarily have their back up against the wall now?
Chuck, just go back and think about it. Look at what happened with the last 10 years. People have gotten up in arms to the point that they've also gotten up and moved with their feet. That's why a quarter of the population left. And so I think what a lot of people tend to do is go back to what we did in the 60s and in the 50s and in the 70s in terms of a revolt, in terms of a revolution amongst the people. Today it's different. Today is people will go wherever their money will take them. And they got so frustrated with what they weren't receiving in terms of a decent return on their investment called their home, in terms of city services, and in terms of public education, they decided, you know what, I'm going to go somewhere else. And now what we have is the result of all of those decisions.
If the mayor and the governor get together, like you said, get in a room, and they agree to something that does take power away from the elected officials, do you think that that would ignite the powder keg that you were talking about?
I think it's one step in the puzzle, yeah. I think that people are going to be frustrated. I think that people are going to look at this. And
so there's no real solution then, because no matter what comes out of it, people are going to explode.
Kyle, I think there is a solution, and I think that the solution is for the mayor and the governor to sit in a room and hash this thing out.
Well, yeah, but after they've done the hash, what do you get? What's the middle ground?
I don't know what the middle ground is because I'm not in the negotiations.
Well, should there be an advisory financial panel?
I think that there should be some financial advice, yeah. But what I don't agree with is a consent agreement, because a consent agreement, in and of itself, in its very nature, is an admission of we give up. We can't do this. I refuse to do that. And so I think what we need is an agreement for a partnership with the governor. That's what I agree
Isn't
to.
the underlying theme of this story, we have an EAA authority taking over some of the Detroit schools, we have an EM in the Detroit schools, and a potential quasi-EM, let's debate whether it is or not. The underlying theme is self-government in Detroit does not work.
And you know what's funny about that?
Is that not the conclusion?
I believe so. And think about this, Tim. What's funny about that is all these flag-waving, patriotic, America-loving, baseball-loving, apple pie-eating, 4th of July-loving, Tea Party, conservative libertarians who cry freedom and liberty at every election. You saw it on the presidential debate. All of a sudden, that's great, except for those people, except for you, because you don't know how to manage government. So therefore, freedom and liberty for us, but for you, no, we give you dictatorship and totalitarianism.
So you believe that race is at the
base
of this?
I don't think it's about race. I think it's about, it's okay until it happens to them. Just like driver's responsibility fees. That was great public policy until it started happening to other people. Then all of a sudden, we got to go back and we got to change that.
Well, do you think the governor misunderstands the culture of Detroit? He made some comments this week that there were some cultural problems that you all don't want any help.
Look, this is what I believe. I don't believe that there's a racist bone in that man's body. What I believe is he has the wrong people around him giving him advice. I mean, you cannot go into a place like the city of Detroit with the social history, with the struggle for civil rights that the people of the city of Detroit have had to go through and put out that type of a document. I don't care if it's a starting point, it was a bad starting point.
Harvey, you have a proposal out there to create a registry for people who abuse animals, which I think is kind of interesting. Can you talk about that quickly?
Yeah, well, what my proposal is simply is that we will create a registry not unlike the sex offender registry, where if you are convicted of animal abuse, what would happen is that you would have to go on, register, pay a fine or a fee, if you will, and if you go to a shelter, the shelter is now required to dig up your name to see if you've been abuser of an animal.
And why do you want to do that? Towards what end?
Well, the couple things. Let me finish. And
30 seconds.
Also, if you're a breeder, you're going to have to do that. Now, my goal in this is to make sure that the people who are abusing animals do not get an animal.
You think there's but you think there's a relationship between people that abuse animals and also human beings?
Well, look at all the serial killers that we've had in this country. Haven't they started off abusing animals? There's a study out there right now that says if a woman is involved in a abusive marriage, chances are her husband is an animal abuser.
Yes or no? Will there be an EM appointed by the governor?
I don't know. At this point, I don't know. The discussions just aren't going in the way I thought they were going to go.
Representative, good to see you. Thanks for joining us on our program.
Nice tie. I like it.
That works for the speaker.
How can I top that?
Does that work with Tim Skulik?
Thanks to Kyle. My fashion advisor, whom I'm married to, will appreciate that. Paulie and Chuck, thanks. Don't forget, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, and we're on YouTube. See you next week on Off the Record.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by a grant from Truscott Rossman, Michigan's only bipartisan strategic communications firm, serving statewide, national, and international clients from their offices in Lansing, Detroit, and Grand Rapids. TruscottRossman.com. By the Michigan Food and Beverage Association, in conjunction with the Michigan Business and Professional Association, working together for its members. Membership information on the web at mishbusiness.org. And by Hager Fox Heating and Air Conditioning Company, providing comfort to mid-Michigan homes and businesses since 1941. Hager Fox and Bryant, for whatever it takes, on the web at hagerfox.com. M Live Media Group, providing real-time Michigan news, sports, business, and entertainment at mlive.com. Tim Skubic blogs about Michigan politics daily at mlive.com. Off the Record can be seen online anytime at video.wkar.org. Episodes on DVD are also available for purchase.
Michigan public TV stations have contributed to the production costs of Off the Record with Tim Skubic.